Apple Incorporated. You've probably heard of the company. I mean, how couldn't you have? It has to be one of the most successful companies when it comes to the tech industry. It's the very first trillion-dollar company ever. And not just in the tech industry. In the whole world. However, this does not disqualify Apple from receiving criticism, which is why I can make this video. So, you're watching the second episode of Talking About Tech, and today, we're talking about 4 things Apple does that I don't like. So at number 4 on this list, we'll be talking about Apple's secrecy. Now, if you didn't know how secretive Apple is, then that's probably because they kept that a secret from you. But in all seriousness, Apple is way too secretive. And this is something I don't really like. Whenever Apple starts working on a new product, they'll rarely ever make the news public. The only way you'll ever find out what they're working on is if they themselves told you, which would probably be very rare. However, this has taken place over a non-disclosure agreement, which basically means that private information could be shared by Apple, but the people that information was shared to couldn't tell anyone about it. But this didn't exactly happen, and within time, journalists from Apple Insider, Think Secret, and others shared this information that was to be kept secret. This led Apple to filing a lawsuit against these journalists in December of 2004. Now, while these journalists kinda deserved it because they shared private information, Apple wouldn't have these problems if they weren't so secretive. So next at number 3, I will be talking about how proud Apple can be, as a company. Let's be fair. Apple deserves bragging rights, considering all of the company's successes. Too many to name. But there are times where Apple has gotten a bit carried away. In the year of 2006, it was made known that the iPod had a bit of a worm, if you know what I mean. Instead of actually trying to fix the issue, Apple said, and I quote, "As you might imagine, we are upset at Windows for not being more hardy against such viruses, and even more upset with ourselves for not catching it." Something similar to this happened quite recently in October, with the October 10, 2018 for Windows 10, when a certain glitch that messed around with your documents was reported. Microsoft immediately took action, unlike Apple who just had to show off and brag about how they could have catched the worm but didn't, before they actually did anything. So at number 2 on this list, I'll be talking about how Apple isn't much of an innovative company anymore. Yes, I know. You've probably heard many people say the same phrase multiple times before, but hear me out. Apple is a company that feeds off of its own successes. Take the iPhone for example. Regardless of the type of operating system you prefer, you cannot deny the fact that the original iPhone was innovative. For its time, it was way better than Android phones could have ever been. But as its popularity increased, innovation decreased. For a time, it kind of felt like once you've used one iPhone, you've used them all, because Apple didn't really care about the phone itself, but rather, putting it on the market. Now if you're wondering if this is even something to get mad at Apple for, well, it is. Apple is supposed to be the company that thinks different, the company that innovates. But, if you're selling the same thing over and over, people aren't really gonna buy it. Speaking of buying products, last but certainly not least on this list at number 1, we're going to be talking about how hungry for money Apple can get. Now, if you do buy Apple products, you've probably noticed the huge amount of money you spend for them. I mean, how couldn't you have? You've got to know how much you're spending on a product before you buy it, right? Getting back on topic here, Apple charges way too much for their products. The original iPhone sold for $499, but that was just for the 4GB model. If you wanted the 8GB model, you would have to pay up to $100 extra. And you couldn't really do much with this phone. You couldn't take videos, you couldn't take selfies with it, it could barely do anything that modern phones can do today, and yet you needed to pay $500 to get one. It's the same thing with many Apple products today. Take the iPhone X for example. The iPhone X cost just about $1,000. And yes, while it does have features that set it apart from other phones, $1,000 is a bit too much for a phone that could break at any time. Same with the new iPad Pro, which too has a $1,000 price tag. Why would I pay so much for a tablet that will end up like this? The point I'm trying to get across is that Apple expects more from you, while you expect less from them. That's something that I don't like. If you're going to spend $1,000 on a product, then that product better be worth $1,000. But, that concludes this episode of TAT.